Dear friends, welcome to Spacefaring Civilization, a place where fan and filmmakers of optimistic science fiction help and support each other to create more optimistic science fiction and inspire a better future. Hi, I'm Masood. Thank you for joining us today. We have a wonderful panel again with us, Amelia, George, and Sebastian. Yay! We're talking about directing. So this is the last video in the series of directing for now. So we're talking about post-production. How do we do directing during the editing stage and the post-production stage? So my question to you guys is, how do you turn the shots and the footage that you got during production into a story that makes sense, or like a inspiring story?
Look, in terms of, at least from the work that I've done, look, I haven't had a lot of opportunity to sort of direct my own work. And I personally, I do enjoy directing other people's work and having my own vision to that. So when it comes down to sort of expressing my own vision, I definitely use the storyboards from pre-production and then use that to help me in post. But definitely the edit, like, it takes so long because you shuffle around things. So even your vision in the beginning changes in the edit. Like, and during the filming, like, again, things can happen during filming. So the way the film has to turn out in the edit can be shuffled around. You never know. For me, I never know sort of what my film is going to look like. I always have that image in my head. Oh, this is how I want it to go. But I never confidently can say, oh, I know this is how it's going to look in the end. I'm not Spielberg or anything like that. So I'm definitely, I'm more the go with the flow. Obviously, prepare as much as you can, but when it comes down to it, you've got to just sort of go with the flow. What works in the edit is what works, even if you have to remove things that you had your heart set on while filming and in pre-production. Sometimes what works is just what works.
Look, honestly, I'm not entirely sure what I can add to that. That was beautiful. I suppose I would say make sure that you've actually got an editor locked in, which was our biggest issue with Bonkers. We went through a couple, unfortunately, for various reasons. So I suppose
something that can happen.
Oh, absolutely. So you
have to have a strategy for that.
I think having all that overproduction before you start would help guide whoever ends up with all your bits and pieces at the end to try and pull together that vision. And if it can be consistent, that is even better.
Sebastian?
Yeah, I think having an editor or a good editor definitely helps. In the case of One Small Step, I was my own editor. And I think if you can do that as a director, that really increases both your editing and your directing skill, because you can it's like a retrospective of like, all right, this worked, this didn't, all right, this is what I'll do next time. Potentially that's what you need to carry into the next production. But I think, mine was interesting because I was actually making it for a part of a NASA competition where we used a lot of stock footage of NASA footage and 3D animation. So I kind of had all this in mind going into the story development. So I kind of had this mandate, this mission to kind of have that in the film somewhere. But kind of reworking it to the voice and the actor and stuff was a bit challenging. But I think with these short films, it's always nice to kind of, especially sci-fi, optimistic sci-fi, it's always nice to try and provoke your audience into thinking about the implications of the large context that you're talking about. But I think more important than that is making your audience feel something. So if you can do that, hopefully you've captured what you've captured in the production process. But if you can bring that through and kind of punctuate it with the music, the editing style, whatever it is, the animation, then I think the power is yours in editing, really, if you've got it all in production.
To add what to Sebastian said, also being my own editor for most of my film, well, for all of the films I directed at least, the editor is always right. But no, look, definitely in the edit, you will find yourself even arguing against yourself, even if you are doing your own edits, that you have differing points of view. But in terms of telling that story, getting that emotion across, and stuff like that, definitely it can always change in the edit. So
So how important is it to think about music before post-production? I know sometimes we leave it to post-production, but is that something that you would recommend we think beforehand?
Look, for me personally, it is highly influential. Like back from when I was doing short films when I was a bit younger, I always had the music first, and sort of that music would inspire the idea. I'm definitely, for me, I'm definitely more musically oriented. So Edgar Wright, I love his filmmaking and how he edits to the beat of not necessarily music, but the beat of the foley that's going on inside the scenes. So and yeah, definitely. Doesn't necessarily have to, but for me personally, it is a big influence. Obviously, you can't always choose that music that you want to use, but as a sort of template track, and then work your way around it. For me, it is definitely a big part of it.
I think if you can, it's probably beneficial. I mean, to be honest, I don't really choose the music until post-production. So, I mean, unless it's some kind of famous song, which I probably won't get anyway, I'll probably have like the vibe in mind, like the kind of style of music. But to be honest, it's kind of like whatever fits the editing at that point in time. So, or vice versa, if I'm editing if it's a montage and I'm doing that to the song beats or whatever, then I might find the song first. But usually I put the pictures in place, and then I try and find the music to kind of, bring all the emotion and everything else into it. So yeah.
Look, music generally evokes emotion. So even if the music that you choose in pre-production is not the music you end up using in post, and actually pulling everything together, I think it does help drive what you're trying to achieve in the scene if you've kind of got it playing in the back of your mind. Putting my actor's hat back on again, I recently did a feature film where I was playing a very dark, psychotic character. And pretty much before most scenes, I would actually have a playlist that I would listen to get myself into that headspace before I went in. And it does pull emotion, whether it's anger or happiness or lust. Music is very important to anything you do. So I think having an idea, or at least a vibe of where you want the music to go is important. Yeah.
With the editing process, so going through the whole, choosing what to keep and what to throw away, what do you recommend others to think about when they're going through the same process you are? What did you go through yourself that you can recommend other people to do as well?
I think it's about refining, really, and seeing, like I was saying, seeing what works, seeing what doesn't work, and and you learn so much if you're either editing or in the edit suite. You learn so much about your own directing style, I think, because you can kind of work out what shots you might not have needed, what shots you do need if you were to do it again. Because most, let's be honest, I mean, most on the cutting floor, most things kind of get shortened or cut to make the story what it is. So I think being there and being, and not beating yourself up about it as well, I think is just, take it as a learning process is really cool.
Yeah, in an ideal world, we could always go back and shoot more footage if anything's wrong in the edit. Obviously, that's not always possible. So yeah, definitely, if you don't have that coverage, then you're making those sacrifices. And that's why I always make sure I shoot a master, because if there's something that I'm missing in the performance in terms of a close-up, then that's on me. Hopefully you can go back and reshoot it. But if there's just sort of something that needs to be, I don't know, not necessarily filled, but like there's a pickup of maybe you missed a shot of, someone's hands touching another person's hands. Go the extra mile and shoot that. Get two people who not necessarily the same actors and shoot their hands touching. Like, you can manipulate the story so much in the edit. So yeah, having that extra coverage just sort of helps you along.
I don't think any artist is going to be absolutely 100% happy with their end product either. So, as much as you do as much as you can, but knowing when to say, okay, enough's enough, and let it go be its own beast, is also very important.
So let's talk about one of my favorite topics, and that's special effects. One of the important aspects of science fiction. Considering that we're all doing low budget stuff and whatnot, how much special effects is too much and how much is not enough? And how do you decide?
If it's going to detract from the story itself and you're just doing it for the love of special effects or VFX, then that's definitely too much. Maybe you're in the wrong field.
No, don't get me wrong. I do love my VFX sort of, 2012 movies that are, the story isn't there. It's just like, oh, these characters need to survive, and they will. But it is more of a visual experience. So don't get me wrong. I enjoy my special effects and the VFX. But yeah, definitely on the point to what Amelia was saying. If it is distracting from what the point is, that the effects are trying to come across, then yeah, you're overdoing it. And you can't always say we were going to fix it in post as well. Just so you know.
Many words.
Can't fix it in post. Yeah.
Unless you have a green screen behind you, then maybe you can. Yeah, I think, unless you're super competent and confident in your abilities for visual effects, special effects, then I'd say probably less is more. For One Small Step, we really just needed like a few cool props that could stick in people's chests and that kind of thing. And that just enough to sell the story, to sell the world, that, to give the idea that there's this larger sci-fi world out there. But really we were just putting like bits of wood on people's, with lights, but it looked really cool on screen. But, it was enough to kind of sell the fact that it was this other world that these characters were living in. So yeah, it depends really on the story, but I think if you can get away with less, then, awesome. If you can't, then yeah, I don't know, write, different scripts.
No, that's definitely true. Definitely true. As a matter of fact, I'm going to be interviewing a couple of filmmakers who made Cosmos. It's a low-budget feature film, and they have very minimal special effects in there, but it looks awesome. It looks really awesome because the story is just interesting, and it is about characters, isn't it? It's not about it's not so much about the stuff. It's about the people.
Yeah, some of the best sci-fi films, are the lower budget films. So yeah, you definitely can get away with just using the bare minimum to push that story and point across. Yeah, definitely.
What tips do you have for emerging directors of optimistic science fiction that you recommend? So what are the top tips?
No one starts with, the arrivals of the world. So, just write a story and give it a red hot go. And trust your crew. Always trust your crew. Look, have your editor ready, even if they are going to swap out halfway through. At least have someone who's there kind of with the story, I suppose. Like they've read the script or they've been on set at the time. Maybe that's also helpful. And try and maintain some level of control of it. I would say. I think sometimes we can get so caught up in the making that we kind of lose control, not only of ourselves but of our story a little bit. But try to pull it back in and tell the story that you want to tell.
I think knowing your story is really valuable. I think, and that goes for every phase of production, not just post-production. Like, like post-production is great. Like I was saying, you can sit in there and learn, where you went wrong, but be open to, rewriting the story, so to speak, in the editing process. You know, and don't, like I said, don't get too down about something if it didn't work. I think it's all a learning process. So if you can go in with an open mind, I think that definitely helps.
Yeah. Look, a film is never finished. It's just released. So you definitely have to have confidence in yourself when it comes to the post-production, you know, making sure, I'm not sure if this is working. I've tried it 1,000 ways. I feel like this works. Sometimes you just have to trust yourself and trust that the audience is going to understand what is coming across on screen, sort of thing. Yeah, that's my main sort of advice.
Yeah, good. Thank you, guys. And my advice to dear friends, SFC Films community, is to actually finish. It doesn't matter how it ends up. The main thing is you actually finish and you move on. Learn from it. And that's the whole point of short films, is that you learn from it until you get to a point where you can create a much, much better quality film. So that's the advice from us. Thank you very much, Amelia. Thank you very much, Sebastian. And thank you very much, George, for this wonderful series of videos, discussion panel we had on directing. I wish you all the luck on your future films, and please consider having them streamed on SFC Films if you do something. Any final words before we go?
Just go out there and do it.
Live long and prosper.
Yeah.
There you go. I can't do it. It's too cold. Good on you guys. Thank you very much for joining us. Join us again in our next video, where I talk with filmmakers of Cosmos. Until then, keep making optimistic science fiction.
Woo!